questions anyway. So you might as well have company with us. Okay.
All righty. Are we ready to begin?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Welcome everyone to the first Framingham Heart Study Town Hall webinar. We want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope that it was not too difficult to get on. I, for one, am not tech savvy, so I hope that is not challenging for anyone else. I had several inquiries via email about what this was, and I just wanted to quickly touch on the fact that for 70 years, we've been asking all of you to do exams, do a test, take a survey, update your records, whatever. We're always asking things of you. So in this unique time where we had to take a pause, we wanted to also take a pause and just ask all of you how you are. That's it, very simple. So with that being said, I'm going to turn the screen over to Emily. She is going to go over the directions that you saw. And just a reminder, the email that was sent on Saturday also has these directions attached if you need to reference them at any time during the meeting. Emily?
All right.
Oh, by the way, I'm Maureen Valentino.
All right. Okay. So, and Maureen is the main recruiter for the all you participants, which I'm sure you all know. So, and I'm Emily. I am the Research Center Manager, and I'm sure most of you have seen me at the Heart Study at your exam and around Framingham. And we are very happy that you could join us this evening, and we look forward to addressing any questions you have tonight. So before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes to go over. And again, as you asked, as if you're wondering why you are not seeing yourself, it's because this is a Zoom webinar. So it's not a regular Zoom where you see yourself, like you can see me in my background. You will only be seeing the panelists who we will introduce shortly. So if you don't see yourself, that's normal and everything is fine. And it's okay because we can't see you, that you didn't have to dress up for the meeting tonight. So we're going to have three sections of this town hall. The first is the intro that we're doing now. The second one is the RSVP questions. At that time, there won't be any live questions or Q&A questions taken at that time. And the last is the open forum, where there will be a mix of live and RSVP questions. And if you remember, the RSVP questions were done from the link in the webinar invite. So right now I want to draw your attention to the bottom of your screen. Here you should see, and you can look on the screen here, you should see the hand raise, chat, and Q&A icons. iPad users, you'll see these icons at the top of your screen. All right, we will not be using or monitoring the chat icon, just the Q&A and the hand raise functions. We encourage you to submit new questions at any time by clicking on the Q&A feature. And again, it's at the bottom, and iPad users, it's at the top. There you can type in any questions that you may have for our panel. All right, we will also use the raise hand function. So when the time comes, we will ask those of you who wish to ask a live question to the panel to click on this raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. All right, our team will be on the lookout for your raised hands, and will try and call on you to ask your questions as time allows. I will allow you to talk, and your microphone will be live so everyone can hear your question. But I want to remind you that when you do go live, your name will appear for the audience to see. We are also recording this session. So make sure you are comfortable with this before clicking on the raise hand icon. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can tonight. And if we aren't able to get to every question, you can always submit your questions by email to fhs@bu.edu. And if there is even enough demand, we might even do an additional event like this. So after a few brief words from our panel, we will begin by addressing some of the questions that you have already submitted. We will continue to provide instructions on how to ask additional questions throughout the event. So please don't worry if you are not entirely clear on the process right now. And bear with us because we are also new at doing this. So at this time, I'd like to introduce the director of the Framingham Heart Study, Dr. Vasan Ramachandran. Early in his career, he practiced as a cardiologist, and little known fact, he trained as a heart study fellow for 2 years from 1993 to 1995. And I was working in the clinic then too. So Dr. Ramachandran, I give you the mic.
Thank you, Emily. Welcome and good afternoon. I'm the third musketeer, if you will, and it's my honor and privilege to welcome you all to today's virtual town hall. This is your town hall because you all are the study. We do have some moderators lined up. We have invited a couple of special guests, and we also lined up some questions based on those that you sent us in advance. But to re-emphasize, this is your town hall. We can take this conversation in any direction that you all choose to take it to. Second point I want to make is that we have not done this before. So this is the first for the Framingham Heart Study. So if something does not work, I indulge your patience and I beg your pardon in advance. Like Emily always likes to say, if something doesn't work, it's always Vasan's fault. That being said, we hope to learn from this experience, to work out the kinks, and to better next time. Because I hope this sets the stage for more periodic town hall meetings in the future, perhaps unrelated to a pandemic. This is the conversation we want to keep on going. We want to listen to you. We want to learn with you, from you, and most importantly, we want to serve you. You all have been always very much in our minds and in our hearts, including in these difficult times. So we like to say hi, we care a lot, we have missed you a lot, and here is the chance that we can connect. It's my pleasure at this point to introduce one of the special guests on our panel. Dean Karen Antman is the provost at the BU Medical Campus and the Dean of the BU School of Medicine, and one of the strongest and staunchest supporters of the Framingham Heart Study. Dean Antman, welcome, and would you like to say a few words to our participants?
Thank you, Dr. Ramachandran. On behalf of Boston University School of Medicine, I'd like to thank all of you, the Framingham Heart Study participants, for your strong commitment and long-standing contributions that are unrivaled in science and epidemiology. Boston University strongly supports and very much appreciates the study's outstanding science over the decades, and even now during the pandemic. I particularly want to thank the Framingham leadership and staff for their attention to participant safety and for their diligence in getting all of the approvals needed before in-person exams begin. Again, many, many thanks for participating in the town hall.
Thank you, Dr. Antman. It's my pleasure now to introduce our second guest. Dr. Davidson Hamer is a professor of global health and medicine at Boston University School of Public Health and School of Medicine. He is a board certified specialist in infectious diseases with a particular interest in tropical and emerging infectious diseases. Dr. Hamer is a fellow of the American College of Physicians, the Infectious Diseases Society of America, and the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Dr. Hamer currently has active projects in Bangladesh, Zambia, South Africa, and also in the United States. Of note and interest to this audience that he's the principal investigator of the Geo-Sentinel Surveillance Network, a global network of 68 sites in 28 countries that conducts surveillance of emerging infectious diseases. Several of us have heard Dr. Hamer recently on NPR or WBUR very frequently during this pandemic. Welcome, David, and here's an opportunity to say hi to our participants.
Okay, thank you very much, Fasan. It's my pleasure to be here. I, followed the output of this very famous study for many years, and it's generated a lot of incredibly useful evidence. So much appreciation to all the families that have participated in this over time. And I hope that COVID-19 has not adversely affected you in the last few months. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Joanne Mirabito. Several of you know Joanne. She is a professor of medicine at Boston University School of Medicine, and she's directed the research center activities for several decades. Joanne, you want to say hi to our participants?
Sure. It's my pleasure to be here as well. I've been at the Heart Study for many years. I hope you are all safe and well during these challenging times. I'm so thrilled to have this town hall this evening and hear how you're all doing, and very thankful for all of your contributions over the many years, including as we reach out to you for your medical history updates during this time.
Thank you, Joanne. Last but not the least, I want to welcome and introduce my colleague, Daniel Levy, who is the NHLBI Director of the Framingham Heart Study. Dan, you want to say hi to our participants and welcome them?
Thank you, Vasan. This is a really wonderful opportunity to get together, but in a most unexpected way. We're all really thrilled to live in Massachusetts. It's a wonderful place, but we were hit early and hard by COVID-19. In recent weeks, however, Massachusetts has shown the value of adopting a healthy preventive lifestyle approach with mask wearing and social distancing. And we've had one of the steepest declines in COVID-19 in recent weeks. And today's announcement that there was only 174 new cases and 1 death in the entire state. So we're excited to see that things are looking up, and we hope it stays that way.
Thank you, Dan. Back to you, Emily and Maureen.
Thank you.
All right. So the next segment will be about 25 minutes. We will read some of your questions that you submitted through the RSVP link on the webinar invitation. Our 3 guest panelists who will help read these questions are all participants in the study and have other study-related roles as well. One of our panelists is Tom Gracia. He is a member of the Gen 2 or Offspring cohort. He has also been a member of the Ethics Advisory Board since 2015. And for those of you who may not know, the Ethics Advisory Board functions as a counsel to the Framingham Heart Study. Every cohort is represented on the board with the exception of the original cohort. The board makeup also includes local physicians, a member of the clergy, a genetic counselor, and representatives from BU and NIH, or National Institute of Health. Another panelist is John Galvani. John is a 3rd-generation participant and the president of the Friends of the Framingham Heart Study. The Friends are a group of 8 participants who help fundraise for the Heart Study. And our 3rd panelist is Peter Allen. Peter is a 2nd-generation or Offspring participant and the treasurer of the Friends of the Framingham Heart Study. So Tom, I think you're going to start with the first question, please.
Thank you, Emily. The question is from Barbara, who we thank for being a participant. It says, or she asks, can you explain the various groups of the Framingham Heart Study generations and their names? And I'm going to offer that question to Maureen.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Barbara. I hope you and your family are well. This is a great question that we get a lot, and I know it is very confusing. So the there are 6 cohort in the Framingham Heart Study. The original cohort were recruited in the late 40s, and they were randomly selected in Framingham. There was no pattern to it. And then approximately 25 years later, great minds decided to recruit the children of this original group. They were identified as the offspring, or which I like to call now the second generation, because of course the third generation are also offspring. And then in the early 90s, although Framingham was ethnically diverse, the landscape changed. So to better represent Framingham and the country, we focused on recruiting African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, other ethnicities. And this group was identified as Omni 1. And then, of course, as you know, Barbara, in early 2000, they recruited the third generation, which is the children of the offspring. And in conjunction with that, to be consistent, we also did what is called Omni 2, which were children and relatives of the original Omni 1. Then the 6th group is called the new offspring spouses. These were just a small group of about 100 that were recruited at the same time as the third generation. And they were actually, I have no idea why we call them new offspring spouses. They were actually parents who were not recruited at the time of that we recruited the other offspring, but they had 2 children, 2 third generation come into the study. So we were missing the parents. So this new offspring spouse was the missing parent of one of these third generation. So that is the 6th cohort. And just for the record, we're going to have an article about this, a nice table in the newsletter, the next newsletter we do, because this is always a point of confusion. Then for your second question about how often are you all seen, this has changed over the years many different times, but currently our model is about every 6 years. The offspring are seen and the Omni 1, then the third generation and the Omni 2 and the new offspring spouses. Okay.
All right. Peter, did you want to ask the next question, please?
Sure. There were actually 2 questions that were very related, so let's put them together. Andrew asked, what are the triggers for reopening in-person visits? And there were, I think, 3 people who all asked, when will the heart study resume operations? Perhaps that's best answered by Vasan.
Thanks, Peter. I want to thank Andrew, Otis, Robert, and Tom for giving us these questions. I hope all of you are doing well. There are 2 parts to this question. Just to repeat it for the virtual participants, what are the triggers for reopening in-person visits? And when will the heart study resume its operations? I want to step back a bit and first recount for you the basic principles that go behind our interpretation of the triggers and the timing of the examination. And these principles are inviolate, and they've been there with us for over 70 years. Your safety, the safety of our staff, your trust, which we hope to earn continuously, giving you a high quality experience while protecting your confidentiality, and in the process, generating high quality data. So those are the principles we abide by. So what are the triggers? The triggers deal with the science or the epidemiology of the pandemic in the country and in Massachusetts. The pandemic, national pandemic, is like a war, but all pandemics have local footprints, which are the battles, if you wish. So for us, what it means is that the triggers means we study the epidemiology of the virus, specifically in Massachusetts. For this purpose, we turn to national data from the CDC, but also mass.gov data, which we scrutinize on a daily basis. And the triggers include what we call as 6 indicators. And these 6 indicators deal with the healthcare system capabilities and the public health infrastructure in the state of Massachusetts. These include rolling averages measured over a period of days of the positive test rates for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the number of hospitalizations, the number of deaths, the health system readiness in terms of the ICU beds available and their occupancy, the testing capacity in the state, and also contact tracing. So we monitor these to see when Massachusetts is ready. And as several of us know, Massachusetts is today in phase 3. We move from the start to the cautious to the vigilance phase. And for this purpose, we turn towards the readiness of the Framingham Heart Study infrastructure itself to receive you. Just to clarify, operations in the Framingham Heart Study that stopped were the in-person visits. The Framingham Heart Study staff and investigators have been working during this pandemic through telework, been working using your data to produce science. We have been bugging some of you with calls, medical health history updates, some of you with practice sessions for tele exams. But the readiness to open and receive you and welcome you back requires 3 sets of things that need to happen. We need to look at the engineering of the Perini building, the facilities and the equipment, its air conditioning and its readiness. We need to look at our administrative processes. How do we manage our communications? How do we manage our cleaning and disinfection? How do we train our staff to receive all of you back? And then the third category is what I refer to as the mandatory safety standards at the workplace. Social distancing, hygiene protocols, staffing and operations, cleaning and disinfection. We have worked through all this, and I want to acknowledge my colleagues on the executive committee, as well as Joanne Mirabeto and all the other staff in helping us think this through. The number of approval processes required of us by the Boston University, and these are in process. They deal with the implementation of appropriate signage in the building, directionality of the traffic. They include our review by the Environmental Health Services at Boston University to certify that we are ready to open, an attestation of the building, the retrofitting of our air conditioning with UV filters. They require a series of steps that we are working through. But most importantly, we also have to be vigilant about what is going on in Massachusetts at any point of time. So at this point, we are thinking through the process and obtaining the requisite approvals. It might take approximately 2 weeks after we are approved for us to be ready to receive you, by which I mean the research center starts getting active. We make sure all the protocols are in place, the staff are trained, and then we will start the process slowly. We'll start with fewer participants, perhaps 2 per day, with social distancing. And then we'll slowly climb up based on active pursuit of data from Massachusetts, which keeps telling us, do we go forward? Do we continue to maintain the same pace? Or do we need to step back at any point of time? So the mantra here, if you will, is to be vigilant, to protect all of you, and to respect your safety and also your trust. So this is the big picture view that I've answered, but I'll pause over here and perhaps we can unpack this further during this conversation. Thank you for that question.
All right, John. You're muted, John.
Thank you, Emily.
Okay.
This question is from one of our participants, Frederick. He would like to know, when will canceled appointments begin again? And I think Maureen is able to answer this.
Hi, Fred. Thanks for that question. So the recruitment team will make the canceled appointments a high priority, but of course we will be dictated by the guidelines that Dr. Ramachandran and Dr. Murabito dictate for us to serve the well-being of the participants. But believe me, we're most eager to get you all back in. So when we can, we will.
All right, Tom.
I have the next question, and it is from Deborah. And the question is, how safe is it for a 70-year-old to return to work in an elementary school classroom? And that goes to David.
Well, thank you very much for the question. This is a challenging question where, the state is planning to reopen schools, and there are a lot of safeguards being put in place. Each school system is going to be taking slightly different approaches. Just looking at the big picture, COVID-19, the risk for more severe disease is clearly higher in older individuals, and even more so in those that have underlying medical conditions. So somebody who's over the age of 60 or 65 is definitely at higher risk, even without any underlying conditions. There's some evidence that younger children do not spread the disease as effectively as older children. And this is good news. I mean, it's been coming for a while, but most recently just published in the last few days is a study from South Korea. There was a very large study suggesting that children under the age of 10 there's very limited transmission to families from children under 10. Now, nobody's really looked at transmission to teachers, but I think that's good news. In contrast, older children, those aged 10 to 19, are thought to transmit the disease pretty much the same way an adult would. So there's definitely higher risk in secondary school. I think with appropriate precautions, including mask use or facial covering, and for the 70-year-old, attention to hand hygiene, and then the distancing measures that are going to be implemented in school systems, it would be reasonably safe, not completely. I would say it would be reasonably safe for that person to return to work, but it definitely is something that needs to be considered, and it depends on how well how adherent, for one, the children are, but also how careful a plan the school system has for trying to protect the health of their teachers. So thank you for the question.
Before I give the next question to Peter, I just want to remind people, we will not be monitoring the chat. So if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A. Okay. All right, Peter, was there another question?
Yes, Mark submitted a question. Actually, he'd like to learn how we intend to go forward. And perhaps that's another for Vasan.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Mark. I hope you're well, Mark. It's a broad question, so I will try to answer it in terms of broad principle. What's our path forward? I think it involves vigilance, review of the metrics related to Massachusetts. I enumerated them in the answer to the previous question. A lot of it is anticipation. We anticipate based on the data what's going to happen in Massachusetts. To give you an example, there are several things, although today it looks things are under control in Massachusetts, with the arrival of Labor Day, with the arrival of the students in the greater Boston area, with the arrival of the flu season. So there's a lot that we need to be able to anticipate. We need to listen, and we need to learn. Listen to the public health experts, listen to the Department of Public Health and the Massachusetts government. Listen to you all, which is the purpose of this initial first forum. And then based on those, there's a judgment made as to how do we move forward from our current protocol of starting small, few exams to ratcheting it up to a higher frequency. And we also need to communicate. So the steps involve vigilance, anticipation, listening, learning, maintaining agility and flexibility to move up and scale up our examinations or scale down if the pandemic worsens. I believe this virus may be with us for some time, which means that these principles of anticipation, navigation, communication are going to be cardinal steps in moving forward. I hope that answers your question, Mark, but happy to further expand on this in the open hour to unpack these principles further. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasan. Tom, do you have another question to read, please?
I do. This question is from Betsy. And I'm going to hand it off to David. I like the wording. It said, would you, I think that's you, David, take a new and minimally tested vaccine?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's clearly a massive effort ongoing to try and develop a vaccine to protect people against COVID-19. Just today, actually, data from 2 studies were released in The Lancet, and very exciting early data showing both that the vaccines were safe, but also they induced a strong immune response. And in developing a vaccine, vaccines go through multiple stages. They go through what are called phase 1 and 2 development, where they try and figure out what the optimal dose is. Do they induce an immune response? Are they safe? Usually those studies involve hundreds or maybe 1,000 people. Then the next stage are phase 3 trials, where they try and show that the vaccine protects against a disease. And in doing those, they continue to look at safety, and the numbers of people in these studies are much larger, often tens of thousands of people. So they, if there's a more rare safety problem associated with the vaccine, they'll start to get an idea of if that's the case. By the time they've finished phase 3, there's now a large body of evidence about the safety of the vaccines. And if they prove effective in terms of preventing the disease, then they go to market. Based on my knowledge of the process and the large numbers of people that are tested in these different phases of development, I personally would feel comfortable taking a vaccine soon after it came to market. In fact, I've even been part of some vaccine protocols, not for this vaccine, but for other vaccines under development in the past. And by the time they're in phase 3, usually there's a good amount of safety information. So personally, I would feel very comfortable. And I think that, this is going to be one of our key public health interventions to try and control this disease and allow us to get back to living our lives normally. So thanks for the great question.
Thank you, David. All right, and Peter, do you have a question to read? You're on mute. Peter, you're on mute. Okay.
Thank you. There were a couple of people who must be in generation 3 because they asked, when does the next exam for Gen 3 start under these conditions? Vasan, is that you again?
Thanks, Peter. And I want to acknowledge both Donna and Andrew who asked the question. I hope both of you are doing well. So let's talk about what the plans for Gen 3 and Omni 2 Exam 4 were pre-pandemic. The terms of our contract, which determines our work schedule, was that Gen 3 Exam 4 and Omni Wave 2 Exam 4 would begin in the fall of 2021. And there would be a 6-month lead-up period, the fall of 2021. Usually we have the preparatory phase where we prepare the protocols, make sure everything is in place, and then the examination begins. Now, after the pandemic, things have changed, and we are still in that gray area. We are trying to determine how much they will change. So here are 3 things that would determine the exact timing of Gen 3 Exam 4. Approximately, I said it's the fall of 2021, but it will also depend upon when the current ongoing Gen 2 Exam 10 or Omni Wave 1 Exam 5, when that finishes. Like explained in the earlier part of the questions, that we will scale up. We were scheduled to finish the 10th examination of the offspring cohort and the 5th examination of the Omni Wave 1 sometime late summer, early fall of 2021. It looks like that would be pushed further into the fall of 2021. Again, that would depend upon the status of the pandemic in Massachusetts. If things go well and we manage to scale up, which is what we hope to do, which is what we anticipate, it is conceivable that Gen 3 Exam 2 might begin in early 2022. So we are hopeful. There's one more factor besides the status of the pandemic and the completion of the ongoing offspring Omni Wave 1 exam, and that is that we need to have 1 or more ancillary studies funded to bring in the generation 3. So during this pandemic, a large number of investigators have been submitting grants that need to be funded. And then the participants come in, and then we have the content of the examination. So because we have worked hard and we are very hopeful that the ancillary studies will get funded. So tentatively, we are looking at early 2022 as the potential start date of Gen 3 exam 4, Omni Wave 2 exam 4. We hope to keep in touch, Donna and Andrew, and communicate with you. You all are very precious, like each of our generations. So it's very important for us to make sure that we communicate the timing and tell you when we are ready to welcome you back. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vasan. And John?
Yes, Kyle has a question that I'm sure we are all concerned about, and that is, how does COVID-19 affect the heart long-term? Vasan?
Thank you, John. And I shared this question with David, and I'll start us off. The key question here is long-term. We are still in the early days of understanding the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the putative agent that causes COVID-19. What are the long-term consequences would depend upon longer-term follow-up. And that's an unknown question, but we do know something based on initial observations. We know that it's an illness where people get very sick. They often have pneumonia in the lung. And what that means is that there's additional stress on the heart whenever you are sick with pneumonia. In addition, now there's a wide recognition that the SARS-CoV-2 virus, it has these pokey spikes all around it. And these pokey spikes, they actually latch on to receptors, ACE2 receptors, which are there in the lining of the blood vessels as well as on the heart. And initial observations suggest that because of that, the heart might get inflamed. Sometimes we use the word myocarditis to refer to the inflammation of the heart muscle. And when that happens, several things can happen. You could leak small amounts of biomarkers, and troponin is one, a protein which is released when the heart muscle is injured. So it might appear in the blood. Sometimes it has been described that people present with symptoms of a heart attack, and then they go on to test positive for COVID-19. So the heart can get inflamed. There could be leakage of some proteins. Rhythm disturbances are common, and these we refer to as arrhythmias, where the heartbeat goes irregular. Approximately between 10 and 20% of people who are hospitalized with severe COVID-19 have signs of cardiovascular damage. The long-term sequel is something only time will show. It's also important to understand that there are a lot of the people with COVID-19, about 20 to 30%, have blood clots in the lungs. And those blood clots in the lungs also have a bearing on your cardiac function and the function of the heart. About 5% of these people also have clots in the brain, and they manifest as stroke. So there's a widespread linkage to the vasculature. So the answer to the question is the heart is affected. The long-term sequelae are not known. There are several manifestations ranging from leakage of proteins, myocarditis, symptoms of breathlessness, in part due to pneumonia, in part due to failure of the contraction of the muscle, and also rhythm disorders and clotting in the lungs. I'll just turn over to David in case I missed something. And David, I welcome your comments.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was a good summary. I think I agree with you that there in the acute illness, there are a lot of different insults that happen to different organ systems, including the heart and lungs. And I would also emphasize the vasculature. I mean, you mentioned clotting, and that really has been a big problem. But not just in the lungs, but in many different parts of the body, including leading to strokes and other complications. We don't really know what the medium-term or long-term effect is. We suspect in patients that have had more severe COVID-19 that they will have long-term repercussions and complications, in particular pulmonary disease, but also this, is closely related to the heart function. So I think time will tell. I mean, there are some longitudinal natural history studies that are starting that will help give us insight into some of these complications, because there are other complications, neurologic, kidney, and so forth, that we're starting to recognize. So it's an important question, and I think we need more evidence to try and understand and hope that things do improve and not persist. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Back to you, Emily.
Actually, I'm going to pass it to Maureen.
Thank you all so much, especially John, Peter, and Tom for helping us through this segment. So the next segment we're going to do is going to be the open questions from the participants. This is going to be when we're utilizing the Q&A feature and the hand raise feature, not raising your hand, but at the bottom of your screen. So to be clear, the Q&A is done. I will read those questions. If you select the hand raise, then you're going to be given the mic and you can ask that question yourself. And also a reminder to the folks who submitted their questions to ask in the RSVP, if you want to read your question, please also use the hand raise feature at this time. Thank you. Okay, we'll begin. Emily, you want to start?
Do I want to start? Okay.
If I can, if you're not ready.
I'm not ready. Go ahead.
So the first question is from Anna. Are there any plans to partner with other medical facilities outside of Massachusetts to conduct the testing for those of us that live out of state and are unable to travel? Boston, I'm going to give that to you.
Right. It's a great question, and it's something that we need to think through more about. I think you asked two parts to your question. One is about testing and being outside Massachusetts. So I think I will turn to Joanne, and Joanne, maybe you can help us unpack those plans for Anna.
Sure. So I can certainly understand thinking about how one could travel safely at this time, because the COVID-19 varies so widely from different states outside Massachusetts, and certainly everyone needs to follow the guidelines and within their state, and certainly to stay safe. And so what we've been doing to allow people to participate in the current exam and be safe is that we are working on televisits, which is similar to what we're doing here in this webinar with Zoom, but it's a one-on-one where there's one research center staff member or recruitment staff member and one participant. So you can actually see each other in the televisit. A recruitment staff member like Maureen reaches out and helps you set up Zoom. And then a research center staff member like Emily reaches out to conduct the visit. And we are able to get a lot of really key and important information about your medical history and other important information like physical activity, mood, and mobility. So that's one way that allows you to participate in the exam without having to travel from your state to Massachusetts during this challenging time. There's also other opportunities, because sometimes we do what is called a callback exam. So some of our studies, I noticed someone asking about, for example, neurologic or brain exams. So sometimes our core exam does what we call a callback. And when people come in for those other studies, we can do testing that would have been done at the time of our core exam when people come at a later time for that exam. So I think we have several opportunities for people to come in and participate in the exam. I think it's a really important question, and we definitely want everyone to participate and feel safe in doing so. So thank you so much for the question.
So thank you, Joanne. Tammy would like to ask her question. Tammy, I'm going to unmute you. And you can ask your question.
Okay, great. As a third-gen participant, while I'm grateful for the appreciation that Heart Study staff have shown for my time and other contributions, I was wondering if it's possible to get sort of more than your thanks. I've been wondering that, you know, with your more than 7 decades of cutting edge research done using our and our kin's personal health and heart data, have you ever considered seeking grant funding to offer health and heart health education learned from our data back to us? And even just one tip that I've thought of as a patient and family advocate myself, I don't have access to research studies. And I was thinking if you could develop an FHS participant portal, for example, as a way to provide us with free and open access to each and every published study that uses our data, how wonderful would that be, that we don't just go dark in between visits, but you keep us engaged with what our data has led to. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy, and I'll take a stab at answering your question. First of all, thank you for raising that issue. I think it's a great idea. It's something that we have not done, and I appreciate your calling us out on it. I think the idea of seeking grant funding for educating our participants and sharing the results of their own research with them through participant-specific portals is a great idea, and there are several other networks which are participant-centered, the PCORI network, and I think the active engagement of participants is a very good idea. So one of the things we would, motivated by our question, think through in the coming months is how would we operationalize this beyond seeking and obtaining grant funding to do this. The second notion that you mentioned, which I think is very appealing, is sharing the publications with you. And just to remind people that publications that we use federal grant funding, they become open access after a period of time, which is an arrangement worked out with the parent journal. It is possible that some of those publications may be made available through the participant-specific portal that Tammy, you have directed us towards. I also think that it's possible for us. We have done that in the past, marginally, if I may say so, through our newsletters where we acknowledge important publications. But clearly, based on your feedback, we can do a much better job. We can have summaries of each of the research articles posted while an embargo is in place. We can have the article posted with a summary which is focused towards the participants. So you're right that we need to change our education modalities more to be participant focused. At this point, I would say it's a stretch goal in the immediate next year, but it's a goal worth pursuing and worth investing. So Tammy, I hope that your question has stimulated some of us into doing a better job of sharing the results of your research directly with you all. So I appreciate your question, Tammy.
Thank you, Vasan. Thank you, Tammy. The next question is from Steve, and he asks, when do you think the 4th generation will be included? And also, John, he thinks he went to high school with you, just to mention.
I saw that.
Thank you for that question. I think this is a question several of you have asked as to when will we enroll a 4th generation. It remains an aspirational goal for several of us who would love to see the extension of the spirit of altruism, the gift of your time, of your biosamples to science and public health extended to a 4th generation. That would be amazing from where we stand within the heart study. We do have very distinctive questions we can ask of a 4th generational study that would be unmatched on this planet. That being said, the enrollment of a 4th generation would require suitable funding. such cohort studies, as exemplified by the first generation, the second generation, and the third generation, they tend to be expensive because they involve infrastructure and they involve longer term commitments. But I'm of the strong belief that the return on investments for public health and science are absolutely amazing. And we have also been thinking about how we could do this so that the infrastructure is not as expensive as it used to be in an era of digital medicine and digital connectivity. And I want to acknowledge my colleague, Joanne Mirabito, who has led some of those EFHS efforts. So a lot of thoughts in our minds, but at this moment, it remains an aspirational goal. I hope several members of our funding agency within the NIH, including the NHLBI, are listening to these questions and this dialogue, and they understand the extraordinary keen enthusiasm among the participants of the three generations to goad us on to enroll a fourth generation. So I'm not sure I've answered your question other than saying that it remains an aspirational goal, but it's something very much in our minds. And I wonder whether, Dan Levy, you want to come off mute and address this question? Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Vasan, and thank you for that fascinating question. At the time of our 60th anniversary, back in 2008, the director of National Heart, Lung, and Blood at that time, Dr. Betsy Nabel, who's now the CEO of Brigham and Women's Hospital, came to a town forum in Framingham, and that question came up then as well, 12 years ago. And she said at that time, I don't see any good reason why this couldn't happen, that we could have a fourth generation. Vasan touched upon the key issue. We wouldn't be recruiting a fourth generation simply because we want to. We'd be recruiting a fourth generation because the science is compelling and we're able to justify the amount of funding that would be required for such an enormous endeavor. We'd have to have the right scientific questions. We'd have to be sure that what we're attempting to do answers an unmet scientific need in the community. I'm sure we would have the passion on the part of our participants. I'm sure we can find the champions for this kind of study, but getting together the scientific questions, the compelling questions to ask, and ensuring that there is a funding mechanism, almost certainly National Institutes of Health or National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute funding for this would be a critical step.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan and Vasan. Anna would like to ask a question. Anna, I'm going to unmute you. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, you had
Okay.
a question.
Yes, I have a question. I'm part of the Omni group, and at the time that I guess they recruited the children of the Omni group, I was told they couldn't reach me, so my children cannot participate. And I was wondering if that is permanently closed because it's been a while now that that group started, or whether there's a possibility in the future to add my children.
Anna, again, thank you for that interesting question. Just following up on the discussion that we just had, there are no options which are closed. Transgenerational studies in epidemiology are invaluable. I think the question becomes the identification of the key scientific questions we could ask and identifying a funding mechanism. And the heart study, the leadership thinks a lot about this. So it's not a closed option, it remains an option. It's something that we need to work and figure out how to get to. So we appreciate the question, Anna, and I apologize for not being able to give as convincing an answer as I hope I would want to give.
All righty. Thank you, Vasan. Next question I have is from Sarah. I live in Florida and I hear so much conflicting advice about how safe it is to reopen. Who should I be listening to? The CDC? Question mark.
Maybe I'll have David take a stab at this one.
Well, this is an important question. I think there is central collection and collation of data from all the states at the federal level. There's been some issues in the news about some of this going to HHS rather than CDC, but I've actually been in touch with colleagues at CDC about this, and that was really meant to consolidate hospital level data so they can do a better job making sure there's enough supplies for hospitals. The CDC is one option. I think actually most states, including the state of Massachusetts, have developed their own dashboards that are really practical sources for information. And the sort of dashboard that the state of Massachusetts has developed has a number of different components. I think they were mentioned in the beginning, but some of the key ones are, what is sort of the number of new infections? What's the 7-day average for a proportion of tests that are positive? And right now, the number of new infections is very low. The proportion of positive tests is quite low, certainly compared to Florida, Arizona, Texas, many other parts of the country. There's some other measures, hospitalization, deaths. I think they're not that useful unless there's a real raging epidemic. So all these can be used by the state and the public to try and track the state of an epidemic. And I think that it's important for the state public health authorities and politicians to use these to guide opening, but also potentially the need to pull back if opening is done too quickly. And our state, Massachusetts, is in really good shape right now, but I am really worried about the next couple months. Given the number of cases in different parts of the US and outside of the United States, but there's not a lot of incoming travelers. But the potential for of introduction of new patients or individuals with infections into the state and then spread is substantial. And so we need to really keep up our guard, and the use of masks and all the other public health measures, social distancing, minimizing congregations of people are going to need to continue, I think, through the fall and probably through the winter.
Thank you, David. Esther, you'd like to ask a question? I'm going to unmute you. Hi, Esther.
I'm a part of the Omni One group, which means that I'm quite old, and I don't.
Your sound is going in and out. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Nope, lost you. We can't hear you, Esther.
At all?
Nope.
Now we hear you.
Hello?
Now we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I was wondering how one gets to be a part of those televisits that you have for some people. Or do we just sort of, at some point, we stop following the people who are part of the older group and no longer look into, what's happening to them and their health?
Thanks, Esther. I'll turn this over to my colleague, Joanne.
Thank you for that question, Esther. We always follow everyone. I hope you will be looking out for our contact for our phone call. Maureen or someone on her team will be calling. It takes a bit to reach everyone. We've just started piloting the televisits, so that's probably why you have not been contacted. I'm sure you will be contacted in the future, and thank you very much for asking that question. We are interested in hearing from everyone and follow everyone for as long as they are in the study. And I see Maureen shaking her head, so she may want to say something as well.
Thanks, Joanne. Esther, I promise you, we will call you next week. We have no hesitation about recruiting televisit folks. Thank you for volunteering.
And Esther, your point is well taken. Perhaps we need to do a better job of communicating this to you and to others, that every participant counts at Framingham. It's a message which is very consistent, but we need to communicate it more effectively, repeatedly. And I apologize if we have not done so in the last couple of months due to the pandemic, but we'll follow up on this. Thank you for participating in the Framingham Heart Study.
Talk to you next week, Esther. All right, I have another question from Carl. The long-term health impacts of COVID survivors, including cardiovascular, are obviously unclear, but will be vitally important. Do you anticipate including such measures in FHS protocols going forward?
Thanks. That's a great question, Carl. The answer is yes. We have several applications, scientific applications pending, where we are trying to explore the possibility of studying the impact of COVID-19 on Framingham Heart Study participants. I think as a first step, we would need funding, and we are exploring different mechanisms within the NIH to get that funding. And these steps would be administering a questionnaire to the participants across the generations, questionnaires that ask symptoms related to COVID-19 to ascertain whether or not you had mild, moderate, or severe COVID-19 illness. It would also involve testing of the blood for antibodies at a point of time when reliable antibody tests become available, and then putting the two together and then linking it to long-term follow-up that all of you have been steadfast contributing over the decades. You can just imagine the power of Framingham if you're able to determine the status of COVID-19, the antibody response, and the previous information we had, and the future information that you all will give. Some of these applications, we are also partnering with sister cohort studies across the entire United States. And one of those includes approximately about 45,000 people. So we are waiting to find out the results of those grant writing exercises to see when we could knock on your doors and tell you that we'll be administering a questionnaire. Maybe we need a pinprick and a small amount of blood to test for the antibodies, and then we'll track you. And Maureen and Emily will chase you till you come back, and we can link the two together. So the answer is yes, the plans are there. We hope to have greater clarity, hopefully in the next month or so. So again, we'll communicate these ongoing plans to you as they become clearer. And thank you for that question.
Thank you, Vasan. Judy would like to ask a question. Judy, I have unmuted you. Maybe. There we go.
I think you did.
Yep, Judy, there you are.
Hi. I live in the Chicago area, so our circumstances are quite different from what's happening in Massachusetts. But when I am a news junkie, and I follow this. Dr. Hamer, thank you. I did not realize this was the SARS virus, so I'm going to have to look into that. But what I'm curious about is we hear people being released from the hospitals after 100 days in the ICU. They've lost 50 pounds. They've lost 40% of their muscle mass. But nobody ever says where they go from there. I can't believe they're going home. Where do we stand on respiratory therapists, physical therapists, the long-term kind of things that these people who have suffered so much already will have to endure?
David?
Sure, Judy, that's a great question. Just one quick comment. I mean, the virus that causes this disease was named after the original SARS virus, the severe acute respiratory syndrome virus. This one is SARS-CoV-2 for SARS coronavirus 2. And the disease it causes is COVID-19. I think Vasan noted that at the beginning, but the nomenclature can be a little bit confusing. There clearly patients that have had moderate to severe disease, in particular those that were critically ill, have had a lot of complications in many different organ systems. And they've lost a lot of weight. They're very debilitated. They have protein calorie malnutrition. I mean, they're going to need extensive rehabilitation, whether it be at a high level rehab facility or more of a skilled nursing facility or home physical therapy. So, I think that there are a lot of patients that have sort of moved from hospital level care to long-term care facilities as a step before they go home. And I think that's a cohort that's going to be really important for us to understand how they do over time, because I'm really worried about the potential complications they may have. But they definitely, it's a group that needs a lot of rehabilitation, a lot of physical therapy and occupational therapy. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
I have a couple of questions like this, so I'm going to put this out there. This one is from Mrs. Jojo, but I have a couple of similar ones. How will you handle the people who live out of state and can't come to Mass, maybe until next year safely? Will you continue this exam until these people can travel to Mass safely?
Right. I'll start off with some big picture comments and then hand over to Joanne to extend the answer. The duration of the exam is in part determined by the terms of our contract with the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute. And so there are fixed time frames that are defined, but these are unprecedented times. So we would have to renegotiate the time frame of the exam and get the approvals in place. There is a precedent. Some of you might remember that Gen 3 exam 3 and the Omni Wave 2 exam 3, which finished in 2019, we extended it by 4 weeks so that we could really get in additional participants towards the tail end of that examination cycle. So the answer is that we'll have to explore this and see where along it falls in terms of the timeline. And maybe, Joanne, you want to expand on this answer in terms of how we would proceed.
Well, I think there's also precedent at exam 9. We also extended the exam a bit for other reasons. And we finished the exam with doing exams in the home after the research center portion of the exam completed. We did a number of visits in the home. So I think that we need to be very creative given the challenging times that we're in. As Vasan had said in the very beginning, our very first goal is safety, making sure you all are safe and that we're communicating and that we have your trust. And so we will be thinking creatively about how we might be able to extend the exam to be sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate in this exam. And as I said earlier, we've already piloted due to the hard work of many people on this call, the televisit, so that at least we can get a great deal of the exam by Zoom or by telephone. And we can also get the exam done as a callback, as when people come up at another time when they're seeing the neurology or the neuropsychology ancillary studies, our collaborators for those very important studies. So I think we have a lot of options, and we'll be looking, as Vasan said, into how we might be able to do this in these different times that we're in.
Thanks, Joanne. Every participant who wants to contribute, we'll do our very best to make sure that they get the opportunity to contribute, because your gift is invaluable and very much appreciated, very much valued.
Thank you, Joanne and Vasan. I'm going to read a question. It's from Alan. How many cohorts have contracted COVID-19?
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Alan. We do not know the answer to this. We are very eager to find out the answer to this question. I refer to, in response to an earlier question, the fact that we have pending grant initiatives that, if funded, would position us to administer questionnaires to all the cohorts participants that are currently following up with us to exactly answer this question through two mechanisms. One is a questionnaire-based ascertainment of symptoms, but we do know that a lot of the people can be asymptomatic. So we would couple it with reliable antibody test to document the exposure through testing of the blood. So we don't know the answer, but we can't wait to find out the answer. Hopefully you'll be hearing from us in the fall or soon.
Thank you, Vasan. This is actually another question I get a lot from the participants. Realistically, what are the chances that third generation recruitment will reopen so that children of offspring who were too young at the time of the original recruitment could possibly participate?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. At the time that we designed the recruitment goals of Gen 3, we were aware of the fact that some of the people were young and they were not within the age range that was recruited. Hitherto, we treat some of these pre-enrolled cohorts, pre-enrolled because they're already enrolled, as closed cohorts, meaning no new recruitments are possible. But we have changed that in the past. We did include the new offspring spouses. So I would think hard about this question, that if they were too young to be included but are currently available, we'd have to identify a framework and a funding mechanism for including these. Again, Dan Levy, is this something that you want to make any additional comment on?
Yeah, just like the answer that we heard to the thoughts of bringing in a fourth generation, this would not be as expansive a goal and would require a little bit of understanding of how many individuals would fall into that category, how many would be willing to contribute. But because we've collected information on family pedigrees from everyone over the course of many years, we could construct some knowledge of how many people might fall into this category, and then come back and ask the question, who would be interested in participating, what the costs would be, and what scientific knowledge could we gain by adding these additional third generation sibling participants.
Thanks, Dan. So we appreciate your reminding us about your children who are now growing up. We appreciate that reminder. It means we have additional homework to do. And we like that homework. So thank you.
Thank you, Vasan and Dan. Anita asks, is it possible to share the test results with your PCP more extensively to put intervention in place if indicated?
I think, Joanne, you want to answer this question from Anita. Anita, I hope you are well, and thank you for that question.
Sure. So thank you for the question. It's a really important one. So hopefully all participants know that we do send some results after every exam to PCPs and healthcare providers that each participant designates when they come into an exam. We send things like the results of your blood pressure measurements, a copy of your ECG tracing, and routine laboratory measurements like your blood glucose or blood sugar, a hemoglobin A1C test, which is a measure that reflects diabetes, your cholesterol profile, your kidney function, things like that. And then we return other results that we consider are actionable. And what we mean by actionable is that the test result may tell us something about a health condition that you have, and that acting on it may have a preventive or treatment implication. There are other tests that we do in the research center that really are just done for research purposes, and we don't send those test results because at present there's nothing that we know of that could be done in terms of a health condition with those results, and we really don't know what a PCP or other healthcare provider would do if we sent those test results out. So that's the way we think about the tests that are done in the research center and how we think about what we report out.
Thanks, Joanne. Anita, we want to keep this dialogue going to understand better how we could meet your expectations and your needs. So it's a conversation we'd like to continue to understand better. Perhaps in a separate forum.
I have a question from Nathan. My grandparents are long gone, alas. Are there still living members from the original cohort?
Thanks, Nate. Maybe Maureen, I'll let you answer this question because you updated us today. So,
So we actually looked this up because we thought this would be a question, and there are currently 3 alive as of today.
And Nate, this is your grandparent generation is one of the most phenomenal generations that has contributed to science. So we hope to monitor the last survivor of this cohort and to celebrate the passage whenever it happens of a landmark moment in the history of the Framingham Heart Study. So we appreciate your reminding us about what your grandparents contributed. So thank you for that reminder.
Wow, thank you. That's a great question. I have a question here from Cheryl. Given the vulnerable populations of color, might the FHS make any further research linkages to the Omni cohorts ahead?
Thanks. Maybe Emily, I'll start this off and maybe David may want to comment on this. We do hope to make these linkages pending obtaining funding. We really want to understand what the truth looks like. We know that a third of the severely sick COVID patients are from underrepresented groups, sometimes referred to as minorities. There are multiple mechanisms that people have postulated, and they all may be intertwined and entangled: socioeconomic factors, cultural factors, lifestyle factors, perhaps a genetic predisposition. It's well known that some of the underrepresented groups also have a higher prevalence of cardiovascular risk factors such as high blood pressure, obesity, or insulin resistance. We also know that they have an increased propensity for admissions for infections of the acute respiratory tract, an increased burden of vitamin D deficiency. So how do you disentangle this? What we do know is there's very strong social patterning of disease we observe in this country. And the disentanglement of that web would require a lot of detailed studies. So I'll stop over there with the expression of interest in doing it, perhaps collaboratively with other larger groups across the country, but I'll turn to David to comment more on the vulnerable populations of color and the burden of COVID-19 that this segment has withered so far.
So this is a complicated question that I think none of us know the answer to yet. I mean, there's clear evidence that Blacks, Latinx, and actually Native Americans are all appear to be at higher risk for more severe disease and complications from COVID-19. But the question is that because of race and some genetic factor, or is it because they have other risk factors? There's a lot of obesity in these populations. Obesity has been shown to be a clear risk factor for severe disease in COVID-19. And then there are underlying diabetes and other medical problems. So I think trying to, as Vasan said, disentangle all those factors and trying to figure out whether it's those factors that are increasing risk or is it some other genetic factor. But compounding that is really the sort of social, economic conditions, housing conditions where these people live. You know, they may be living in housing that, where they have more people in the home, they have a lot more contact. Many of them are working in the service industry, so they're out, they have to take public transportation, they have more exposures both at work and on the way to and from work. So it's really a complicated situation, and I think we do need to try and look at different groups of different cohorts to try and understand this across the country to have a better feel for what the factors are so that we can address them in the future.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Cheryl, for raising this important point on this town hall. We appreciate you and your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasan and David. This is going to be the last question we're going to be taking, and this is kind of a great full circle because research at the end of the day is our business, and this is an anonymous submission. I feel it would be so incredibly valuable to have random sampling of all stages of studies, to have blood samples previous, before COVID vaccine, and then also follow up after a vaccine. This would be a reason to acquire additional investments for the Framingham Heart Study. What are your thoughts?
I'm all supportive of this. I'll turn to David again, who might be leading some of the efforts related to vaccination and what happens after vaccination. David, you want to comment on this?
I mean, this is an interesting question. I think that there's going to be a need for more studies that look at sort of the longitudinal impact of COVID-19 on different populations. The Framingham Heart Study is such a great platform to look at some of these questions. But it's really going to require long-term follow-up, looking at immune response, the duration of immunity. Does that immunity lead to protection against future episodes of disease or subsequent episodes if they occur more severe or less severe? And then, once the vaccine becomes available for those who receive the vaccine, how well does it protect? How long does the protection last? I mean, there's just an immense number of questions that could be asked in the context of a study like this.
Thanks, David. Emily, are we at the time when we need to?
Well, I think we can do one more question.
Sure.
Will future studies focus on long-term physical and psychological, social and emotional impacts of the pandemic?
Yes, we again, like I mentioned, we hope to obtain the funding to study the impact at the level of the individual, at the level of the families. We are a multi-generational family study, and at a societal level as well. We want to look at the physical impact, but we also want to look at the psychological impact, the emotional impact, the impact on cognition, the economic impact, and the social network impact of this complex disease. So you're spot on with this question, Marjorie. We hope to address this in our research in the coming months to years.
Maureen, I have one more hand raised. Do I have time for it?
We're probably going to go over, but go ahead.
Okay. Patty, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, Patty.
Patty, you're muted.
I unmuted her. Patty?
Does she have to unmute herself too?
No. There you go. Patty,
No,
you're on.
Patty.
Go ahead, Patty. Did you have a question for us? Maybe we can't hear you. Well, we can hear you. You may not have your sound on.
Sorry, Patty.
Again, maybe Patty, you can email us that question. I apologize for you not being able to ask it on this forum, but we're happy to respond via email, which brings us to the stage when we need to wind down. I want to thank each of the participants on this call. You guys are, gentlemen and ladies, are terrific. Every day, so many of us feel so lucky to work with you. And you have stood with us through 90 minutes of a webinar on a pretty hot day. And we look forward to maintaining this connection, this conversation, getting additional feedback from you. What went well from your perspective? What did not go well? How can we do better? And while I feel that gratitude and feel how lucky I am to work at the Framingham Heart Study with all of you, I would be remiss if I do not also account for the fact that I'm very lucky to work with the staff at the Framingham Heart Study. It takes a village to make these 90 minutes happen. Hours of meetings, planning. I want to acknowledge several of the people, and if I forget some, I apologize. I want to acknowledge Nick DiPercio, Patty Connell, Emily Manders, Maureen Valentino, Andrew, Ken Nito. I also want to thank our panelists, Tom Gracia, Peter Allen, John Galvani. I want to thank the support we have received from Let's, from Nate, from David, from Mike, and a number of people who have been remiss in not mentioning. And of course, my colleagues on this panel and my colleagues who have been watching it over live stream. So with that note of thanks, I want to hand back to Emily and to Maureen. And you ladies have 1 minute to get us through this.
Okay. Of course, I reiterate the thanks. You're an extraordinary group of people, and I also feel so fortunate to have this job and deal with all of you. Just a reminder, actually, anybody, I saw several questions about the neurology study and EFHS, the electronic study. If you have questions about those, please send those questions directly to me, Maureen V at bu.edu, and I'll take care of those. Any remaining questions that were not answered, please submit to FHS at bu.edu, and we will get those vetted and get those answers for you. Thank you all again so much. I hope we feel great. I hope you do too.
And I just want to remind you that this was recorded. You can see this at framinghamheartstudy.org/townhall. And I want to thank all of you for being here. And remember that it is the participants, you all, that make the heart study successful. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. All right, thank you. And hopefully see you soon at the heart study.
Yeah.
Thank you all. And I hope everybody remains safe and enjoys the rest of the evening. David, thank you for being on as well.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.